Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write better fiction. I am Steve McLean, an aspiring writer.
And I'm Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And today we have with us a very special guest, one of our favorites, Alton Gansky.
That's me. And my name's Alton Gansky, and I've written a whole bunch of books.
Yeah, he has written over 40 books. He's a professional in the field. He runs the Blue Ridge Mountain Writers Association. Oh, wait, what is it? The Blue Ridge
Mountain Christian Writers Conference.
Writers Conference every year. And that's a pretty big gathering of Christian authors that come together to discuss the craft and to attend various seminars on how to write better and improve, and it's really good for networking, that sort of thing. And maybe next year I will actually go. I'm looking forward to trying to make that happen. So
we would love to have you.
Yeah,
it's a great place to be, and it's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, it sounds like it's half vacation and half just really fun. Well, I guess, see, right now when I take vacations, they're usually challenging. I don't know about you, but I have kids, and when we do vacations, it's usually not relaxing and fun. It's mostly fun and challenging. So it'd be nice to leave the kids and go to a writers' conference and learn about something that's fun and exciting, without all of the hassle of trying to chase children, meltdowns, all that fun stuff.
Sometimes you need a couple of weeks off after taking a vacation with children.
Yeah, seriously. So today, I think we just lost Aaron for a second. We've got some thunderstorms going through the area where we're at, and I think Aaron just dropped off here. So in any case, hopefully this still gets recorded and everything is all right, goes up to YouTube. But yeah, so I don't know. Have you ever disconnected from a Hangout before, Al?
No, I haven't. I'm still showing live over here, so I don't think we got bumped off. We don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if it. I think this is all cloud-based, so it should go to YouTube, assuming that even though he's not here, we continue this. So in any case, we are talking today about here. Let me text to Aaron real quick. You want to introduce the topic?
My understanding is we're going to be talking about what knocks the reader out of the story, something every writer has to be concerned with, and there's really a very long list of things that'll keep a reader from staying engaged with the story. And I believe we're going to be talking about some of the major items that should be paid attention to, so we don't run the reader away.
Right. So, in your experience, what would you say is a typical rookie mistake that knocks someone out of the story?
Well, I really have a very long list. I think one of the most common ones, though, is point of view faults. It's still common today with some publishers to allow head jumping.
Mm-hmm.
Point of view is whose eyes you're seeing through, and it's always been my belief, and when I teach my students, you only get to look through one pair of eyes at a time. You don't get to look through several pairs of eyes at a time.
Yeah.
Point of view, if you're not careful with it, can knock a reader out of the story very, very quickly. I'm thinking about a book I read by a very well-known New York Times best-selling author. Had a wonderful career, died a while back. But he has a president walking into this party, and we're in his point of view, and he's looking around, and he sees the Secretary of Treasury and the Secretary of State, and this male Secret Service agent and the female Secret Service agent, and then there's this bit of internal dialogue, which is done in italics, that says, "Man, he looks good in a tux."
No.
And I remember stopping, thinking, why is this male president of the United States talking about how good this guy looks in a tux? Because I knew the character wasn't part of his character. The guy was a repeat character, so it didn't fit with that. And it was just simply because he jumped heads with it, and gave the reader no indication of that. So I didn't know that I was now in someone else's mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I've actually run into that, and for some reason I cannot remember what book it was, but it was a book I really did not expect it to be in, and there was just this obvious, head jump, just like what you described, where it was somebody else's thought, that just got intermixed, and it was another character that was in the scene, but it was so unexpected because I thought that I was in this other person's head that
Mm-hmm.
it just put the brakes on for me and just ruined everything. Looks like we have Aaron back, by the way.
Yeah,
Welcome
hey,
back, Aaron.
no, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if you already explained the whole thunderstorm thing, but
I did, yeah.
yeah, okay. So you're talking about head hopping, it sounds like?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
point of view shift. He asked me one of the major problems, and it is a point of view shift or a point of view fault. And though it's still allowed in some books, and you'll read it, I recommend against it. The safest, the surest, and I think the best way to keep the reader involved is to use one point of view at a time, no more. And then if you do a switch in the scene, if you have to jump heads, put what's often called a hiatus break or an extra white line in the manuscript, and so when it's in the book, there'll be a white line, sometimes a little dingbat, little symbol or something in there that tells the reader, all right, I'm not in the same person's head. I'm not in character A. I'm not in the protagonist's head. I'm in someone else's head.
Right.
There's been a shift, and the reader can follow that. But if you're jumping back and forth, it gets very confusing.
You know, I've noticed that also with verb tense. People will be in past tense and then they slip into present tense. If there's not a real sharp control of that, and that's just a simple mistake, if there's not a real sharp control of that, that's also going to kind of jar the reader, and they're immediately going to be reminded that they are reading a book. Just real quick, did we talk about John Gardner's real
No.
real
Not
and
yet.
present?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm gonna misquote this, and it makes me sad. Maybe you can help me out, Pops. But John Gardner talks about establishing a real and persistent fictive dream, and anything that breaks that is going to take the reader out of the story. So the idea is when a reader picks up a book and starts reading, they are no longer in their physical world, but they are, vicariously experiencing something through a character's perspective. And as long as that is maintained, as long as that reader is within the world that is created, this fictive dream that is created by the writer, they'll stay immersed and they're going to stay in the story. And that's really what we want for our readers. Anything that's going to jar them, anything that's going to remind them that there are words on page, that somebody is telling them this story rather than the reader experiencing it, that for me is what the things that really take the reader out of the story. And so a lot of it's control of your prose, being a professional and making sure things like grammar, spelling, punctuation, all of that is cleaned up, being consistent, like you say, Pops, with the point of view and verb tense. Those are, I think, some of the real easy ones to maintain. 'Cause a good editor, a good editor is going to be able to catch most of those for you. But there are some other things that also take readers out of stories. So, did you guys talk about it? Did I miss anything else?
No, we really just got into it and started talking about the POV errors that are generally like a rookie move, or I guess even veteran writers could probably do the same thing, and that's just typically something that an editor is going to immediately pick up on. Something else that for me has been a real issue that takes me right out of the story is when I'm reading along and a character makes a decision that is like a non sequitur, does not follow, violates either the character's personality in some way, who they are. It violates that for the purposes of just redirecting the plot in the direction that the writer wanted to go in, and it is not true to the character. Or a character makes a decision that is illogical to the story, or draws a conclusion about something that is not the natural conclusion that, say, the reader would come to. And in some cases, that's okay because the character might do something like that. But, for instance, in the books where there's a romance and one character completely misinterprets the actions of another character, and all that would be required to clear it up is just simply asking the question, and the question isn't asked, and you lead into this whole other section of the book that is directly the result of this omission of a natural outcome. It just that is something that typically frustrates me as I read through any book, is when something like that happens. I don't know how often you guys see that.
Go ahead, Pops.
Yeah, you see it quite a bit in television because they need a crisis. And so, where the whole problem can be diffused with a simple question or one line, they don't offer the line, they don't ask the question, and then that gives them another 20 minutes of story that they can tell. But as a viewer of the movie or the television show, it's disruptive. It's just hard to believe. There's no credibility anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing in a written story. If the character is not acting according to what we've been told about the character, that knocks us right out. This often happens across gender, where you have a woman writing about a man, may have a strong male character, but doesn't know how to express emotion the way a man would express it, or really probably stuff it, the emotion. And the man, sometimes writing with a woman lead, will have the same problem, and she ends up coming off sounding more like a man, and it knocks the readers out that way. I do recall reading a story where the man was, well, I couldn't tell a difference between him and the female lead.
Interesting.
In conversation and in response.
You know, I remember reading this one guy's book, and he had elements of the book were written by several different characters where they were all writing poetry, but the poetry for each person who was writing it was the same. It was, you could tell that it was coming from the same writer each time.
Are you talking about me?
I am.
Fair warning, that was my first novel that was never published because it wasn't very good.
I'm messing with you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's allowed. That's allowed.
We did a person fiction where Steve insults Aaron's writing again. I will say though, I saw this in one of my writing classes in college. I was reading a selection that another student had submitted to a workshop, and there were, for whatever reason, this woman needed to call the police. Her friend told her, you know, hey, you should call the police. And she said, call the police? What are you, crazy? I can't call the police. And then the next 3 pages were all of the reasons why this character could not call the police. Mm. And the next line was, she convinced me to call the police. Wait, 3 pages? Where was that convincing? Yeah. And so I think when you drop stuff like that, when you skip over very important logical arguments that need to be made, and you just simply skip them, that's going to take the reader out of the story as well. Like you say, characters making decisions that just don't seem to fit the character, or characters overlooking simple solutions to problems. Mm-hmm. They're presented with this particular situation. First thing that comes to mind is, well, you know, you can't find your son. You call him on his cell phone, but for some reason you never call him on their cell phone, and you never establish that this 22-year-old kid doesn't have a cell phone. Or you call friends, but they never call friends. They just sit home and worry the whole time. And that seems like when the reader starts asking questions like that, doesn't make sense for things to unfold this way. That's going to be something else that kind of takes the reader out of the story.
I think that cell phones have become the bane of a lot of writers because they're so convenient and they're such an easy way of just fixing everything. Because you can pick up your phone and you can straighten everything out very easily. Hold on.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
If that's for me, I'm not here.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
That better be Jesus, dude. We're on a podcast right now.
So, but yeah, I think that you know, cell phones, that seems like something that would tend to get overlooked because most writers don't want a character to have a cell phone because they want them to go and do something without knowledge of, you know, what that other person's thinking or whatever. And that omission by itself in a world where the technology is available will take someone out of the story. Just something like that.
I call those logic faults. And it's very jarring. And now I'm not talking about a fact fault where you just get something wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, World War II started in 1926. Well, no, it didn't.
Right.
So the year's wrong, and that was, of course, a factual fault like that will knock a reader out. But there are faults of logic where it just doesn't hold together. Mm-hmm. I edited a book for someone one time, and there was a fight scene coming up, and the guy had a handgun. I think he had a 9mm or something like that, a Glock. And then he meets the bad guy, and they get into a fist fight.
Yeah.
I'm reading, and I'm thinking, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm pulling the 9mm. Well, and I wrote her, and I said, why doesn't he use the gun? And she said, I don't know anything about guns, so I just kind of left it out. And so
Wow.
we rewrote the scene that there is a physical confrontation, there is a fist fight, and in the process, he loses the gun, and they're in a parking lot, so it skitters beneath the car. So I had to take the gun out of the equation.
Right. Right.
Right.
But see, that's a logic fault.
Or the cell
They
phone gets
would do
crushed, or the cell phone gets dropped somewhere, or whatever it is. It's like just throw this out there. Chekhov's gun. If there's a gun on the mantle, then it better go off at some point in the story or the final scene or however you want to do it. But
Yeah.
if you present the reader with a piece of information that is tantalizing in any way, and generally when you're writing, you want to make sure that if you're presenting information, it has a purpose. Because if it doesn't have a purpose, then that will eventually take the reader out. They'll have less and less buy-in as they feel that element that was presented doesn't have any kind of a payoff. It was pointless, and that's something right there that I think does a lot of the same damage to a book.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Well said. Other things that tend to take readers out of the story, I find, for me personally, would be a lot of adjectives and adverbs, or where they're reaching too far for a vocabulary word. They're trying to use a really big word to sound smart when another word would work just as well. I guess this is kind of a author voice issue. I had this problem a lot as a beginning writer because I really wanted to demonstrate exactly how intelligent I was. So I was like, I had the thesaurus next to me, and I was like trying to find the biggest words I could that I didn't even know existed, but I'm going to put them in there. Don't know how to pronounce it, but that's fine.
Right.
That way everyone understands my genius.
What's funny is I know people, and I'm not going to name them, but they decide to take words that are large words that they don't necessarily like. A word that you find in a thesaurus might be exactly the same as the word that you looked up in the first place, but typically there are nuances associated with different usages
Yes.
that come along with it that will color it a different way. And so when you use a similar word, it's not always going to convey the meaning that you want to convey. And I know people who will use the complete wrong word in a sentence, and it takes me out of my story.
This is
My life
this is
story.
this is what we call the benevolent donut, right? Like you want to say the donut is good, so you use the word benevolent, and it's like, really, this
Yeah.
donut is charitable. It's a
There you
donate
go.
money
Exactly.
to causes. That's a very cool donut.
It is
But,
giving
yeah.
its all.
It truly is. It's giving its whole, because the donut
Oh.
whole.
Oh.
We're going to work on this. I think
All right.
by the end of the podcast here, we're going to have a working joke out of that.
Yeah, somewhere. The joke I wanted to make was I was really frustrated reading the Game of Thrones series and nobody used their cell phones, right? Like that was frustrating to me. It was a lot
Actually,
better.
I did at one point wonder that while reading Harry Potter, because I said,
Mhm.
this guy was born in 1980, and I'm pretty sure that cell phone technology was around by the time he was graduating in 1998. If not cell phones, pagers. He should have had a pager. I'm just saying, pagers were pretty cool. They were kind of a thing, you know.
If
You
you
know,
were a
on
doctor.
the word choice thing, using the big words instead of small words.
Uh-huh.
Mark Twain said, "Never use a 25-cent word when a 5-cent word will do."
Yeah, exactly. You need to get as much bang for your buck as possible.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes along with this idea of I would extend it. I would extend it to any, these adjectives and adverbs. He exclaimed wildly. We talked a little bit about that in dialogue last week. That call attention to themselves, and that remind the reader that, hey, this is an author, and the author is choosing to put in this huge word that doesn't really belong. It's not necessary. When we do not trust our readers and we tend to over-explain things, that's when I, as a reader, am taken out of the story. That's
Yeah.
when I'm reminded, hey, you've already explained this well enough. Why are you explaining it 2 or 3 more times?
Yeah.
Like, let's cut that out and trust me to figure it out.
Don't underestimate your reader. Definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's it was help me, the lady who wrote A Wrinkle in Time, Le Ingle.
Madeline L'Engle.
L'Engle, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She was giving a talk to a bunch of writers, and she talked about her experience when she wrote this book and started pitching it. She had a lot of publishers come back and tell her, "You wrote this for children? Because this is going to go way over their heads." And she said, "It just goes to show you, never underestimate your readers, especially if they're children. They will find a way to understand." And when I was a child, my favorite book was A Wrinkle in Time. And that is, I think, just a key component in writing is to assume that your reader has the intelligence to be able to put things together on their own, given the information that any one of us, given the information in just everyday life, would probably draw the same conclusion. You don't have to paint a picture. You can give them the tools to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
Well said.
Hey, another thing that pulls me out of the story, because I just thought of this as we were talking about Harry Potter a second ago. I think she walks a fine line when she includes Hagrid's accent in the book.
Okay.
I don't know about you, but when I've read people's accents, that tends to take me out of the book if it's overdone.
You know, dialect is a really tricky thing, and if you can get away from having to do it, then great. But you also look at Mark Twain, who wrote almost exclusively in dialect. Huck Finn and Mark Twain, at least.
Right.
And you know, for I guess more of a modern audience, postmodern audience, whatever you want to call them, dialect is, if you're gonna try it, you better get it perfect. Otherwise, it can cause a lot of trouble, and it can sometimes just blatantly come across as racist, especially if you're writing outside of your own dialect, and it can just sound really offensive. And I think any time that you are, you know, that you were talking about men writing as women, women writing as men characters, I think if we're writing outside of our culture, what we refer to as writing the other, if we're not doing that respectfully, and putting in the research and the time to make sure that we're getting the character right and that culture right, then that's something that's going to immediately take your reader out of the story as well, in a very bad way, not in an annoying way, but in a way that's like, okay, now I'm not just annoyed that I'm out of the story, I'm actually offended at the way that you're presenting this particular thing. So when writing the other, I would say that's definitely something that you want to make sure you pay special attention to get right.
Yeah, certainly. Dave Fessenden, who was actually an guest host at one point in the past, and we talked about his book, The Mysterious Case of the Exploding Speakeasy.
Yes.
He wrote in the comments and mentioned that talking about the romances thing, where the conflict seems to come from just a pure misunderstanding, where a person is maybe too shy or whatever to ask a simple question and get the thing clarified. And he says this is not good romances, but bad romances, where the whole thing just blows way out of proportion. And I think from readers, you may not get buy-in if your premise is just so weak. In any case, whether it's romance or anything, is having a weak premise to start with. Yeah. I'm sorry, say that again, because I think I talked over you.
Yeah, I call it contrivance. There's emotional contrivance. There's physical contrivance. There are all of those kinds of things. And it's because we want to get to a certain point as a writer, then we will create the problem. But if the problem doesn't make sense, we lose the reader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One thing that George is the one who suggested this. He's a student of mine. Suggested this podcast idea, and I thought it was a great idea. One of the things that he was asking specifically, he said, look, I can find these in the things that I read. When I'm reading a book, it's no problem for me to go, wow, this really takes me out of the story. He says, but I'm kind of blinded to it in my own work. And I think that we can all safely say as writers that we are kind of blind to these things in our own work. For the most part, we can, clean up our point of view. We can clean up our, the editing and the verb tense and all of those types of things. We can really tighten that up. But what other types of checklist types questions do we ask ourselves as writers that help kind of open our eyes to these things that we may not normally see, that kind of help us look at a book with a reader's eyes rather than a writer's eyes? Dad, is there anything specific that you do in that way?
Yeah, the first thing to do is to always remember your reader. Our problem is we can visualize it as writers. We visualize it, we know where we are, and so we assume everybody in the world knows. And that's not the case. Those things have to be explained. They have to be introduced. So if you watch a movie, for example, you'll see that they'll show, say, the outside of a building, and it'll only be a moment or two, then you're inside the building, and that's called an establishing shot.
Right.
Its purpose is to let you know, the viewer know where they are. We have to do the same thing in writing. We have to have an establishing shot, and that is we set the scene. Now, if it's in a place that we've already described once, we don't have to go into detail. We just have to let the reader know that's where we are. And there's a number of ways to do that. He put the key into the lock of the door and walked into his home. Now, the home may have been described 50 pages before, but now we know that's where he is.
Yeah.
So we have to first establish the scene. The other thing is, simply because we know our characters doesn't mean our audience knows the characters, and so we have to make sure some of that is clear. I got 3/4 of the way through a book when I realized I hadn't given a single physical description of the protagonist.
It's problematic
in my mind, but
Yeah. Well, and just like on one side of the coin, you've got you don't want to paint a picture for the reader. On the other side of the coin, you don't want to just hand them a blank canvas either, and assume that they're just going to put it together. You do have to watch out for that. And Aaron, like you were saying, we get so used to thinking of everything in our own way. It's like I mentioned this before. Stephenie Meyer, who wrote Twilight. Yes, I'm going there.
Every week you find a way.
She named a character a very strange name, but she used it so often in her writing and had come up with it so early on that by the time it was actually published and there was a huge backlash from all of her readers saying this is the weirdest, dumbest name we've ever heard, it never occurred to her that was an out of the ordinary name until her readers said this is ridiculous. And on top of that, you'll find that your beta readers will become attuned to your writing style. And so your alpha and beta readers. They'll become attuned to your writing style, and they'll pick out your common mistakes and your common errors, but they may not pick out the strange quirks that make up your part of your writing style that won't necessarily mesh well with your readership. And so that's why it's good to get an editor in on it, and have other people look at it who don't ordinarily read your writing.
Yeah, I like how you say that. Fresh eyes are always good. People who aren't familiar with it, who haven't been reading it as you write it. For me, one of the most interesting experiences in writing is when I got the edits back on The Bargain, which I had written years and years before, and I hadn't seen this book or read this book or even thought about this book in some time, at least a full calendar year. And so by the time I got those pages back from the editor, I was looking at it with fresh eyes. That distance of time really helped me to read as a reader rather than as a writer, and understanding that this was going to be in the hands of a much wider audience, and my name was going to be attached to this, and little things where I have in this paragraph they're sitting down, and in the next paragraph they're running across the room and they never get up, or here he's shooting a gun that he never had. Or whatever the case may be.
Or somebody using a sword that had broken a few scenes before.
Yeah, well, that's what. Yeah, but not in The Bargain. So, little inconsistencies like that were a lot easier to pick up. And so I do suggest that after your first draft is done, after you go through and do your initial round of edits, and you get it out to your beta readers and the like, one thing that I do is I don't go back to that. I never look at the book while my beta readers are reading it, because I know if I do, their comments are, I'm going to try and explain away their comments, or I'm going to feel more secure in something that maybe I shouldn't feel secure in, because it works in my brain even though it's not necessarily working on the page. And having that distance of time allows me to say, okay, this is clearly not working on the page.
Very good. Very well said. Al, you have anything to add to that one?
I was trying to remember, was it Robert Frost who used to write a poem and then put it in a desk drawer for 6 months? then come back to it and said
That sounds
if I
familiar.
liked it, then I knew it was good.
Yeah.
6
Yeah.
months separation. And I don't know if he did that for every poem, but you get the idea that
Right.
a little space will help you see some of the errors, and then I'm always amazed how many mistakes I can cram into a book.
Right.
I think I got it all figured out, but I'm amazed how many things slip through.
Yeah.
It's a challenge for you now, isn't it, Pops? You actually are trying to break the record with each new book.
I'm trying. And the problem is my typos make sense, so we all get a good laugh after I write something where I make a typo.
I feel like we should probably do an entire cast on the greatest typos ever, from
Yeah,
our own work and from some works of by larger authors, etc. But
I have a whole speech I do just based on the silly mistakes I've made, and I call it what I meant and what I wrote.
Right. I would like to hear that. That sounds very funny.
I'm gonna have to do that sometime.
Well,
soon.
I did one. I was trying to describe the scene of Seattle from a mid-rise office building, and I was trying to describe the office that had picture windows from end to end. And what I wanted to talk about this window, but what I wrote was the widow was enormous, reaching from floor to ceiling and wall to wall, which is probably one of the biggest grieving women you would ever want to meet. I meant window, not widow. And
Yeah.
got a whole bunch of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've seen some pretty emotional windows. I could see right through them. You know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty. So that happened. So Molly asked a question.
Yeah.
She says, as a reader, does sequencing matter? What I mean is a friend reviewed my current work in progress and told me that I jumped from scene to scene. She wanted smoother transitions instead of my characters strolling the sidewalk suddenly when the previous page was eating breakfast. And I think the way that you handle that, I think we talked about that earlier, the idea of a scene break, line breaks, some sort of symbol to denote that there's going to be a change, not only in point of view, but also in time. So there's a transition of time there. I think that's fine. I think just a simple line break, or rather a scene break, is going to help us to understand that we've jumped ahead in time. We've made some sort of transition in setting, and I'm fine with that. Usually, though, and one of the things she's saying is there a way to do a smoother transition? Yeah, I mean, there is a way. I think generally you can start off with a simple sentence. The next morning, Bob walked down the street, or the night before such and such happened, she spent the evening watching videos and eating bonbons. Whatever it is that however you're moving temporally or even spatially, having a sentence or two front-loaded in the beginning of the scene is really going to help, kind of, as you say, Pops, do that establishing shot. And I think perhaps what they might be referring to, Molly, is that perhaps you haven't put in that establishing shot, and that you just need a prepositional phrase. The next morning, that's simple enough. And so something like that is going to help the reader transition with you from point to point, be that spatially or temporally.
See, I cheat by having multiple POV in my books, and so I'll just switch point of view, and then the next time I come back to that character, you know that something has transpired in between those scenes.
Yeah.
Well, if it's within the same framework of time,
Right.
you can do that. My general rule of thumb now, my first couple books didn't do this, but I always had a hiatus break anytime we did a point of view shift. So I'm switching characters, so I had to let them know that. Or if we were switching location, or if there was a small time change. If it was a major time change like the next day or the next week, I always started a new chapter because that's a stronger break.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I haven't necessarily followed that rule per se. Usually I'm okay. In my books, I jump from character point of view. In the bargain, my chapter breaks are either by a significant break in time or the shift from first person to third person narration. And in the Hand of Adonai series that I'm doing now, currently, the chapters are not necessarily based on time, but I go more by number of scenes and how much has happened within a particular chapter.
You know, you bring up something that's interesting, the doing first person and third person in the same book. There was a time when you never did that. and editors would tell you, don't do that, the reader won't be able to follow. Then we're back to Steve talking about not underestimating your reader.
Yeah.
But then several people, at least in the area in which I write, the Christian fiction area, where I do most of my writing, Angela Hunt wrote a book in which she did that. And she may have been one of the first to pull it off successfully, and that's basically what she did. Anytime she switched from first to third, there was a chapter break, and it worked out fine. And then we began seeing more and more books like that, and the readers really didn't have a problem with it at all.
There's a book the first two in a trilogy that I just finished reading, and I'm waiting for the third book to come out, called The King Killer Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. If you haven't heard of that author, he's very good. I really like his writing style. He's an amazing storyteller, and he does that. But he has a character telling his own story, and there will be a chapter break, and it'll be in the third person, and okay, we're back to present day. And I do have to say that never underestimate the reader. That's good. I may not be as great of a reader as all the other readers out there. It occasionally was a little bit confusing to me.
Sure.
It would take me a second to realize, okay, now I understand. We're back in the present day, and that would take me out just a little bit. But
now, I have seen books where they do that with tense. They'll switch from past tense to present tense, and that's really jarring. And I've never made it all the way through a book that's done that.
Yeah, and I think also there's just personal preference. And it takes an intelligent person to understand what the majority personal preference is going to be, and whether or not their book is going to offend in that nature.
Yeah, we've done an entire podcast. I think we've done a couple podcasts on point of view and the different types of point of view and why you would use each one, etc. But my basic rule of thumb with point of view is whatever you choose, make sure there's a reason. If you're doing first person and third person, there better be a reason for it, a compelling reason that you can't really handle in any other way. If you're jumping from second to first, etc., there should be a compelling reason. I think perhaps the most jarring point of view thing that I experienced was actually a Toni Morrison book, and she's got a Pulitzer Prize, so it's going to be hard to critique her, but I'm trying. Is Beloved is her big one. It's Mercy, which is written in first person, but it's written from about 4 different people's perspective. They're all writing in first person. They all have the same dialect. They are all in similar situations and settings, and I could not keep any of the characters straight. I never knew who was speaking. It became very convoluted and very difficult to follow, and I've seen other books that will go from first person to first person, multiple characters writing in first person, that have handled it well, handled it fine, and it's not nearly as jarring. But for me, that one was particularly jarring. So
you ever wonder? I'll just throw this out there. You know how sometimes you look at art and you think to yourself, "How is this art?" And yet you'll be standing next to somebody who's incredibly sophisticated and a very well-known individual within the art community who looks at it and says, "This is a masterpiece." Sometimes I wonder if maybe the people who are handing out Pulitzer Prizes or other awards and similar awards might be a little bit of the Emperor Has No Clothes makeup, where everyone's going to stand around and applaud the Emperor's clothes, when plainly the little boy that's standing there sees that he's naked. In the same way, I think that sometimes there are terrible violations of the Writer Code of Conduct, and people make these books that then go on to achieve award status, but really they may not actually be good.
Right. I mean, you can make that argument. Toni Morrison is a very quality writer. Beloved is a very good novel, obviously, and she didn't win the Pulitzer Prize for A Mercy, so I mean maybe there's something to that. So, but go ahead.
Like we've also said about Stephen King, for instance. he's a very well-known writer, of course, but I think that we've all agreed at one point or another that now he can pretty much write anything that he wants and slap his name on it, and it's going to sell 1 million copies. And so just because what they have written is amazing doesn't necessarily mean that what they will write is also amazing. But
I would say that he doesn't do that, even though he can.
Yeah.
Whether you like Stephen King's stories or not is one thing, but he is a master craftsman in what he does. I don't always like his stories. His book, I think it was 4 Past Midnight. I thought 3 of them should have been put to bed early, not allowed to stay up that late. But then one is The Langoliers. Remains one of my favorites of all his writing. So there is some personal taste involved in it, and that's going to happen with every reader. We all get that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Steve, were you referring to Under the Dome?
Yeah, for instance, Under the Dome, that's the one that we've been mocking pretty regularly on the show. And I'm sure that it's probably a good book, and Stephen King, in his sleep, can write a better book than I can, no question. So whatever he's written, no matter how bad it is for him, is probably far and away better than what most authors out there can write.
Hey, Pops, I'm curious. Have you read Under the Dome?
I got halfway through it.
Yeah.
There you go.
I like when he head hops from the dude that's like, walking out of town to the chipmunk, Or
was it an armadillo? Yeah. I remember that. I had a lot of trouble with that book. But again, see, a lot of that isn't to say that he did it wrong. When he made that head jump, I knew he had switched from a person to whatever the thing was. I think it was an armadillo. I don't remember now, but some creature, chipmunk, whatever it was. That was made very clear. So it just wasn't a story that resonated with me. But then his time travel one, I thought was fabulous. So, and I have the same thing with Dean Koontz. It's I don't always like his stories, but I know that they're always well written.
Yeah, Dean Koontz. So the thing that frustrates me about Dean Koontz is not just the incredible weirdness, where it gets so far off the beaten path in weirdness, but also he will randomly slow down to describe the garden in a very intense scene, and I can't take it. I just can't. I do not have the endurance to get through something like that. I have to start skipping pages so that I can get to the conclusion of whatever scene we're in, that he's drawing out the suspension. And
knocked you out of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
It did. Yeah, literally.
I think one other thing that I'll say real quick, and we're kind of coming up here on time here, but and you see, now that I'm warning us about time, I completely thought about rabbit trails. How about that? I was going to go on a rabbit trail about rabbit trails. We talk about killing our darlings, and I think one thing that'll also take a reader out is when we have those darlings and we leave them in there, and you can tell that these scenes would be the description of a garden in a very awesome way at a time which is inappropriate. When those things tend to stay in books, like for you example, Steve, it took you out of the story. One of the reasons we kill our darlings is because they're cool and they're precious to us, and there's some fantastic writing. But if it's not the time or the place in the story, then we've got to get rid of it in order to help maintain and protect that real and fictive dream.
Right. Something else that I'll say about Stephen King, and this is not a knock on Stephen King, this is simply my own personal preference, and that is he uses very crass language and very crass or graphic visuals in his books, and those are things that, for me, take me out of the story. Sometimes, I think for some writers, it's purely gratuitous, and it doesn't even fit in the story, and it's just so highly offensive that it just knocks me right out of the story. And I think that that's another category that I'll throw out there.
Well, I can't. I don't want to get in the position of defending him, but when I was reading Dreamcatcher, yeah, we're pretty safe that a fist fight's not going to break out. We got several hundred miles between us, but when I was reading Dreamcatcher, he was doing that, and I kept thinking, I don't I'm uncomfortable with all this language. Some people are, some people aren't. I'm one of them that's a little uncomfortable. But then I began to realize something. The basic idea behind Dreamcatcher is it's an ensemble piece. So you have, I think it's 4 or 5 guys who grew up together. All of them have coarse language, but it was different. He was establishing his character's education by the way they swore. Now, it took me a while to realize that. The one that had the least amount of education, he was the crassest of them all. But the guy with the degree, the medical degree, he would use crass language, but it was always a little different. It was always a little more controlled, it seemed to me.
Right.
And what I finally realized was he wasn't telling me about his characters. He was showing me his characters partly through the way they spoke. And another, well, this one was a film about a submarine, and they bring a ladies' World War II submarine, and they bring some people they rescue from a raft on board. One's a lady, and as the lady walks through the sub, the way the men referred to her, the names they used, varied by position in the sub. So if they're up front, where it's officer country, she was a dame, and then as it went further in the back, it just got more and more crass with it. And that's where the uneducated people were working back in the worst parts of the stinky part of the submarine and with the engines and stuff like that. And those with the college degrees were up front, and so you saw the culture of the submarine by the language they used.
That is really interesting. That's a very cool exercise in establishing character or establishing the environment like that. That's okay. Again, I have to say, Stephen King, I recognize the fact that the guy's a genius. So I'm not going to argue that. I am going to say that the only book of his that I've actually made it all the way through has been On Writing.
It's a great book. So, on that note of offensive material, George R.R. Martin and the Game of Thrones series is very gratuitous in a lot of ways. And what's interesting about it, I stayed away from the series for a long time because I knew exactly how graphic it was, but finally went ahead and read book 1, and basically at the end of book 1 I was a fan. I just had to finish reading the series. But what's interesting is the violence and the gore and the other activities between men and women is all character development. And his characters are all very unique in the fact that they all fight in a particular way, and they all protect in a particular way, and they all love in a particular way. And you can tell a lot about a character by how they love, how they fight, what they protect, those types of things. And so he uses it as a means of character development, and you could argue that it's perhaps overwritten, but there's no question in your mind when you finish that book, you know who each of those characters is very, very well. And so that's how he does it.
Yeah, very good. Well, I know that we could talk about this for a long, long time. There are some things that we have written down that we haven't even touched on yet, but I think we're starting to get up on time, right, Aaron?
Yeah, we are definitely running up against time here. So.
Okay. Well, any final thoughts then? We'll go ahead and go to you first, Al.
Well, I'll add one more, which won't take very long, but be careful in the writing of time faults. And by that I mean either too much action takes place in too little a time, or too little action takes place in too long a time. And one of the places we see it is a couple of people meeting in a restaurant. And from the time they sit down, they say 2 lines, the meal is served. 2 lines later, the meal's done and they're checking out, and nothing has really transpired in all of that. Yeah. You have to keep the timing in mind because the reader's not going to believe that. And so usually just a line or two, they fell into silence while they ate their dessert or something like that. But
yeah,
I would go for something better than that. But you get the idea. Establish the passing of time.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen that in books before, so that's really, really good. Something else I'll mention. You just gave a little flicker of memory here. A little while ago, we were talking about sequencing, and something that I wanted to say is that generally, when you're giving a speech and you've given your audience a series of notes that they're going to follow, as you make points, you are providing the audience with a guide as to how long they can expect for the entirety of your speech or your presentation to go by how quickly you hit the first, second, and third points out of a multi-point presentation. That lets them know your pacing. Similarly, in a book, if you are if you're hitting a certain theme, or you have a certain pace of action and so forth, and then you move off the path from that, that could potentially also take a reader out of the story. And then also, just purely on pacing's sake, properly including action juxtaposed with moments of less action or no action, with the right balance. And I wish Heather was here today, because she had something to share about this, where she actually took her book and broke it out onto note cards and then laid it out and saw where certain scenes were action and moving the plot forward versus scenes that were not. And she did a little rearranging to actually make the book flow much better, just as a way to keep the reader engaged. So,
absolutely.
Aaron?
Yeah. I think I've said what I want to say. I really do appreciate the comments that we've been getting in the feed here from Dave and Brandon and Molly. Got a lot of participation tonight. Really appreciate that, and I'm hoping that we can continue that trend and keeping our listeners on board with us as we record these live. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sure is. We've been doing this now. This tonight is the first time that we're ever doing it on a Saturday night. We usually do it on
Sunday.
Tuesday nights. Yeah, I get my
Welcome
days
to the future.
Right. I'm a time traveler. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, you got to go to work tomorrow, dude.
You know what? I do have to go to work tomorrow, and I will be getting into my DeLorean and driving there.
Fantastic. Hit 80 miles an hour, and I've got the lightning here.
88 miles an hour.
Oh, no. I got to turn in my nerd card.
Right. Oh, man.
Well, that's why you kept hitting the tree trunks.
Yeah.
You're 8 miles off.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's billboard. That's Aaron. He's 8 miles off.
Yep. All right. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for getting with us tonight, and for those of you on YouTube, appreciate you watching. Give us a like and a follow, and leave us a comment if you have any thoughts or ideas. You want to say something. And then, Al, I'd like you to take a moment to tell people how they can get in touch with you to see what you've got to offer out there, because you've got your own YouTube-based podcast. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, I do. And probably the best thing to do is just go to my website, which is, I believe, below my name, if I spelled it all right, altongansky.com. And I do a podcast called Writers Talk. We interview writers, sometimes agents, publishers too. But usually it's writers about their work, and you can see those videos or video interviews like this one. But you can see them at the site. You can download them from the audio only from iTunes. Same thing with Podbean, and we're making sure they get out other ways too. But the best way to see that, or go to YouTube and just go to youtube.com/Alton Gansky, and you'll see all the video stuff.
Al, are you on Stitcher as well?
Not yet. Not yet.
You gotta get on Stitcher.
Well, it's actually been on my list to look at, and I was going to talk to you guys about it. I needed a place to be able to put these so I could get them on YouTube.
Excellent. Yeah.
Downloadable.
Okay. Well, very good. Yeah. It's a pretty easy process, so we'll help you figure it out. All right, Aaron. How can people get in touch with us?
They can get in touch with us on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter at First in Fiction. You can follow me at Adi Gansky. Steve?
You can follow me, for those of you on YouTube, if you look down at the bottom of the screen right here, you can see that I am stevemclain.wordpress.com. Right? And you can also follow me on Twitter, although I've been not very active there, so I apologize, at Steve McLean.
Yeah, likewise. Find me on Facebook, too. You can just friend me. I friend everyone, because I'm a friendly guy. So. Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening, and until next week.
Good writing.